Tim, welcome to Watch One, and thanks for logging on. Today we are looking at the Audemars Piguet Millenary Chronograph, reference 26145OR. This watch, 47 millimeters wide by 42 millimeters high, in 18 karat red gold, represents an outstanding contemporary addition to the AP catalog and an alternative to the continuity of the Royal Oaks and Royal Oak offshores. Sporty and yet elegant enough to pull double duty in dress or formal attire. The Millenary Chronograph is, like the Royal Oak offshore, a brainchild of the great Emmanuel Guite, an innovative designer who led the AP design team during the 1990s. And you can see on my wrist being 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, the watch wears incredibly well, and the key there is that it is an oblong case. You have little overtones of the old Omega dynamic Geneve. The bottom line is the dynamic, that old oval-cased solution to the interaction of the watch with the wrist bone, allows a larger watch to wear well on a smaller wrist. Now, because the watch doesn't have a broad span, lug to lug, you can have the presence of something essentially the size of a 1950 case Panerai Luminor, 47 millimeters, but splayed out end to end, so it sits light on the skin. It doesn't overhang the wrist, and you can really see just how compact it is top to bottom. If you want the look and the feel of a large modern watch, and I do mean full-sized, verging on oversized, but you want it to work well with a smaller wrist, or you just prefer the ergonomic excellence of an oval case in relation to the wrist, then the Millenary Chronograph is a superb option. Now again, 47 millimeters from side to side, so you're getting a big broad dial, and asymmetry is part of the look. But before we dive into that essential aesthetic of the Millenary Chronograph on the dial side, let's talk about the case and the profile of the lugs. Now the profile of the lugs is superb, nice and short, but because the watch is canted lengthwise rather than top to bottom, you get the ability, if you're Audemars Piguet, to move the lugs outboard and give them a little bit more span, a little bit more volume than if you were simply trying to fit an oversized watch on the wrist. That type of round oversized watch often cuts the lugs a little too short to be an effective aesthetic complement to the case. Not so here. Because they do have great length, because they do have that step, because they are a little bit canted off toward the side, that is, they slope downward from the center to the side, they have a lot of character and they add tremendous definition to the case. Likewise, you can see how the elements of the bezel, double-stepped, give this watch a lot of character. Now this is a clear character line that defines the junction between the bezel and the case. Rather than having one flow into the other, this watch is all about partitions. It's all about visual elements that work essentially on their own, in their own right, and also as a logical part of the entire composition. This case has a lot going on, from the oval pushers on the flank by the crown to the double-stepped case and the fluted lugs. This is a highly sculpted 13 millimeter thick rose gold case. Now the bottom line is that the strap is up to the standard of the case. Bolstered as it approaches the case right here, you can see visually it tapers nicely to join and does have semi-conforming end bars, so the spring bars here do minimize the gap between the case and the strap without impeding the ability of the strap to pull down tightly to conform to a smaller wrist. Now, I've mentioned that this watch wears well on a smaller wrist. I want to define exactly how small I think this watch can accommodate. Seeing as how the strap is splayed outwards on both sides of my smallish 16 centimeter wrist, I would say if your wrist is as small as 5.5 centimeters, 5.5 inches in circumference, so about, I would say under 15, maybe even 14 centimeters in circumference, you're going to be able to wear this watch very effectively. And because it is broad and it has a huge, essentially flat case back, it spreads that substantial heft of precious metal very evenly. And it does have a little bit more heft than you would expect because it features a solid case back. So solid gold as opposed to sapphire is going to add a lot of mass and precious metal heft to the case. I like that a lot. Contrasting stitch, semi-bolstered with a taper towards the end at the clasp. Audemars Piguet gives you an outstanding single deploying clasp with the inset AP initials, much like you'd see on a Royal Oak offshore of a certain vintage, but all high polish, 18 karat, finished to an exquisite standard. You can hear that click as it shuts, the mark of high precision. It imparts confidence as well as satisfaction. Moving inboard from this distinctive, ergonomically outstanding case, you can see that the dial is a festival of shapes, of colors, of textures. Now, all of the elements that sit on the central principal silver dial, you have the date, you have the chronograph and constant seconds subregisters, you have the hands, you have the applied, highly stylized asymmetrical Roman numerals. Everything that's gold here is actually rose gold applied, so the standard of quality is exceptionally high. Now, there's a tremendous amount of contrast, both chromatic in terms of color and also in terms of texture. The inner dial itself features a off-centered concentric circular guilloche. If you can think of the concentric circles radiating outward from the center, offset a little bit with a pronounced eccentric, that's the treatment that you get here, and it does change its appearance and change the reflectivity of that center portion as it moves through the light. So it's a highly animated, dynamic appearance, in addition to being just the right amount of calculated asymmetry. Now, another feature that's worth mentioning here is that each of the subregisters, in addition to being of asymmetrical size in their own right, featured beautiful applied rose gold chapter rings. Again, it's just that touch of upscale refinement that really makes the difference with Audemars Piguet. Part of the holy trinity of Swiss luxury watchmakers, along with Patek Philippe and Vacheron Constantin, AP is definitely upholding its reputation with watches like the Millenary, which is large, which is definitely contemporary in its size, and definitely a little bit extrovert and flamboyant in its details. But if you're going to put on a show, put on a good show. AP does. They cross every T, they dot every I. The finish holds up under a loop, every aspect. Now, outboard of the central dial, you see that there is a matte gray or slate-colored tachometer, one of the most highly stylized tachs I have ever seen. This one adds not just contrast, but the kind of calculated asymmetry that challenges the eye of the connoisseur. This isn't an easy watch to take in at a glance. You keep coming back to it, trying to resolve its contradictions in your mind. The play, the animation, the dynamism, the asymmetry, the outcropping of that subregister right there at 9 o'clock, everything about this grips you and pulls you back in. Everything from the beautiful high contrast red chronograph seconds hand to the surprising realization when you really look at the watch and actually measure it, as I did, that the cannon pinions and the hand are actually dead center on the dial. So the hands are completely centered within the oval, even as the dial itself, featuring the Roman numerals and the subregisters, is dramatically off-center. There's a lot of nuance here, a lot of quality, and the same goes for the AP caliber 2385 inside. It's based on the great Frédéric Piguet column wheel vertical clutch integrated automatic chronograph movements, originally pioneered during the 1980s by Blancpain. They represented one of the most important families of really mechanical movements of any kind to debut in the last quarter of the 20th century. Truly innovative, they sort of set the template for everything that came after, and they formed the basis for work later taken up by the likes of Rolex with its 4130 and Jaeger-LeCoultre with its caliber 750 chronograph series. Smooth, a tactile pleasure to operate. Because of the column wheel, you get that crisp actuation. You hear it and you feel it through the finger. And because you have a vertical clutch that's actually engaging the entire mechanism, there's no jump when you start the chronograph, there's no stagger when you stop it, and it always resets perfectly to the index at 12. Moreover, because there is no lateral clutch with its own drivetrain in its own right, you have the ability to leave the chronograph engaged and just use this chronograph center seconds hand to provide a continuous reference for seconds if you don't like to refer to a small second subdial, as many don't. Now, this watch, although it has an oversized extrovert character to it, it is very much a dress reference in terms of its intended use. Water resistant to 2 ATM, so that's splash only. This is not one to take diving. Save your offshore diver or scuba for that. But the bottom line is that this one, in terms of its use high and dry, is very versatile. It goes well with long sleeves, it goes well with short sleeves, it goes well with pants, it goes well with shorts. And it is one of the best examples of the late 90s to present Audemars Piguet Millenary series. Again, designed by Emmanuel Guite himself, the father of both the original Royal Oak Offshore and the Harry Winston Project Z series. This has a formidable pedigree, not just in terms of its manufacture, but in terms of its design provenance. See this outstanding, slightly extrovert, definitely refined Audemars Piguet Millenary Chronograph on our website, Watch You Want. 42 millimeters by 47 millimeters in rose gold.